What's up, everybody? We're back. Jordan, how you doing, man?
Dude, I've never been more incredibly okay.
I love that. I love that answer. But today, well, we decided to podcast again. Been busy doing our other work, which I've talked about a little bit in a couple posts, but yeah, today we thought we would dive into the topic of depression, mainly because of how prevalent it is in the world, and it feels like everybody you talk to, man, it's just depression running rampant, especially I feel like in the world that I'm in every day and seeing these dudes at work that are just broken all the time. So yeah, today that's what we want to do is dive into depression a little bit. And just a little thing before we get talking into depression. If you are someone struggling with depression, I mean, we have nothing but love and empathy for what you're going through and how awful it is to have that hopelessness attached to you like a ball and chain that you can't get rid of no matter what you try and do. Sometimes the drugs that we are given help, and sometimes the drugs we are given make it worse. And it seems like there is no clear path out of such a dark and hopeless place sometimes. So we just want to encourage whoever decides to listen to this who is depressed to keep going and pursuing. And as Jordan and I have talked in our conversations with our own battles with depression, it is something that is really difficult and hard, but there is an other side to it, and that's what we want to try and help lead other people to. That other side where you do enjoy life, you can be happy and whole and not just be stuck in this place of misery and self-loathing or whatever comes from it. So anyway, just wanted to say that before we get going on it. And once again, we are not experts. We're not just going to try and tell you exactly what to do or, that we know. It's more of a conversation that we hope resonates with you, that gets you to go down the rabbit hole to figure it out for yourself. So, Jordan, let's get into it, dude. You want to talk about depression and your go with it?
Well, that's not to immediately flip it back onto you, but I think, I think that's a really well put introduction. And I think tiptoeing around the idea of depression and circumstances that facilitate depressive states that are crippling. And I think a lot about depression as like a soul's immobility. And it's like we wish we had like a handicap sign, like for when you pull into the store, you're like, I can't fucking walk 150 feet. I only can do 5 feet. And I think that's ultimately, not to minimize depression, but I think that's like I think we're becoming aware that there's a hell of a lot more handicapped souls in the world.
Yeah.
And in this current state of our culture, and I think it's not a coincidence, and I think there's a direct cause and effect of where we're at. And I think there's been a almost irreversible, domino and just storm and tidal wave of the ramifications of what our culture is facilitating day to day. And there's a scarily fast accumulating number of handicap signs people are wearing every day. And you can see it in most of your coworkers and your family members in different moments. And I think people are feeling exhausted of not knowing how to calculate their soul's compass to even attempt to find that moment of happiness, that moment of peace, that reprieve from the chaos of isolation,
Sure.
So I think what's important for us to establish before we get into this is kind of our own flavor or texture of sadness. And I think what I want to know, obviously I know you intimately pretty well, but I think it's important that you and I kind of give our own recipe and our own life stories of what we know depression to be from our own lens.
Sure.
And I think that's going to help really create a connection for whoever's wanting to join this depressing conversation.
Sure. So, yeah, man, my battle with depression kind of came in two phases of my life. I feel like the first was right after I got married, and it had nothing to do with getting married. It had everything to do with all that happened in a summer. So I got married in the summer of 2008, and that's when I graduated college. We bought a house. That's when I started working full time, all within like a few weeks of each other. And to go from the person who I was in college to the person that I was after working and everything else, that it was so far apart that I was completely unprepared for. And just the reality of what that was like and how awful it was for me, it was like this crushing reality finally hit that I was avoiding for so long. It was just so depressing because it rocked my world to a place I wasn't ready to go.
Are you saying, not to cut you off, but I feel like you're setting the stage with who you were and who you became in that season of life was radically underestimated, or the life you were living, you found yourself in that like American dream, wife, home, career path, infinite security within all of these things, and there you were waking up and feeling an overwhelming sense of like, this can't be it, to some extent, or the it that it is not facilitating meaning and fulfillment.
Yeah, it was definitely waking up to that security factor being gone. So it was me being this immature college person to all of a sudden being like, whoa, I have to be this mature person that I'm completely unprepared for. And man, it was so hard because when I came to work for my dad, and the person who I was and the person who he was just did not mesh. And, you know, the expectations when you're working for family can really ruin the whole thing. So for me, it was this crushing reality of like, I have to do this every day in this situation of, I mean, it was toxic for me, as toxic as, I mean, as almost as I can imagine anything to be when you're working and almost tied to it in a sense of like, I can't quit. I just bought a house. Like I am a slave to this thing. So basically losing my freedom in a toxic environment was something that was really hard for me to digest. And yeah, I just felt so bad at that time where it was just hopeless and bleak and dark. And the hard part was I was married now. I had a partner who was like, oh, I get to spend life together with you. And then all of a sudden, darkness. And it almost made it worse because I felt so bad because it was just like, now I have this person tied to me and I feel awful all the time. I don't know what to do. And that was back during the time where, you know, I had a much different faith in God, where it was, you know, it was a Christian faith where I definitely went to church and small groups and all these different things as a way of, you know, crying out in the darkness, God, please save me. And just to have that, I guess, that feeling still of just like, I don't know if you're there, you know, and it feels hopeless. And it's this, and I guess I can relate to a lot of people who talk about depression from this self-loathing place, because that's what it was. It was a real dark self-loathing thing. I didn't love myself and who I was. I was ashamed and trapped. And I think one of the hardest parts about being in that place is it's the trick of depression, where you feel like you are alone, isolated, and it's just your problem. But in reality, depression is like one of the most all-inclusive clubs in the world, right? I mean, how many people struggle with it? One of the tricks is thinking that you're the only one when you're in it. And that's what really gets you and captivates you, where you're stuck there. Captivate, like, I'm a captive of this place. So for me, that's what it was, man. It was trapped in this isolating place of like, I'm married, but I feel horrible that I got my partner into this. I don't feel like she can help me. And just being stuck. So I guess, I mean, that was my first bout with it. But it was just something that was, I mean, it was a horrible time in life. And we could get into later what really helped me get out of that. But just being in that place, I guess, where you are in darkness. And it's almost like you forget what being happy is like. Because all you can do is focus on this pain, this residing pain that won't go away. And it's a really miserable place to be at. So Yeah, I mean, for me, that was my first encounter with like real hardcore depression.
Yeah.
I feel like there was like little bits of it where I dropped down. I mean, I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to some of the people that really have like bipolar depression or some of the really hardcore kinds. But for me, I feel like mine was really self-induced, and that's one of the key things where it was something where I brought this on myself, and that was part of my journey out of it. But it was awakening to that idea of like I want to blame so many other things, but I can't because it's in here is the problem, and that was kind of the turning point.
Yeah.
So
What was the phase two?
phase
Was it a different, obviously it's different circumstances, but what's kind of the core flavor of depression that was differing from the original?
Well, phase two came with when I was in seminary and my faith falling apart because at that time I was living with my in-laws and going to seminary, wanting to teach the Bible, and basically, I've talked about it before, is when my faith slowly dwindled and just evaporated before me, and just like, whoa,
Yeah.
I don't know what life like this is like. And so, like I talked about before, where God was at least that thing I could cry out to in it, now that was gone too.
Yeah.
So it was almost like it just pulled me back into the muck of just like, well, what the hell's the point of this whole thing? I feel like I've been duped into this whole religious background that is a bunch of BS. And there's this bitterness that wanted to set in and anger. And it was a really dark place because I felt like it was like I came through this thing that everybody around me was still stuck in. And it was like everybody's huddled in this circle and I'm looking out from the outside going, what the hell just happened? And that's when it was just that it was back in that place of isolation where no one understands what I'm going through. This is painful. I don't like it. And I want to blame so many people for my problems. So yeah, it was just completely this self-induced depression where it was something where I had all this pain that I didn't know how to manage, which led to a lot of, addictive tendencies and in all sorts of different ways. Didn't matter if it was video games, porn, or whatever it was, because I didn't know how to deal with all this stuff going on inside. So yeah, it was phase two of like, oh yeah, you thought that God thing was going to get you out of this? Well, that's not the case, because the way you believe in God and the way you're using God is a really harmful approach. And just to have that truth just smack me in the face like that, man, it sent me spinning. And it was spinning for a while. And you just look at the track record of all this, and it's hard because, like I love my wife and our relationship together, but man, there was part of me that felt so bad because it's not like what we signed up for. And I looked at the documents of like, oh, we're supposed to be two Christian people on the same path, and all of a sudden, whew, then I feel like, well, what the hell?
Yeah. Dually, you feel lost and alone and depressed in your own state, and then there's that sense of like responsibility where you're like, I feel bad that you're having to cohabitate with this, and you're like, I don't know how to dually be honest to myself and my path and try to be supportive and give you hope that I don't have. And it's brutal, man. But I think the reoccurring word that came up for you, and I think you said specifically the word that tied and mirrored the first phase of depression, was isolation. And I think that's ironically something I that really rings true with myself and just a lot of my thoughts around depression. And I wrote something probably too quickly this morning, and it's how I sort out my thoughts. But I was thinking about just specifically, like, words fascinate me, and I've told you this before, because I felt like I was super fucking not good or at anything intellectual when I was a child, and I thought I was super dumb. And as a child, I think it was fourth grade, they put me in a program called NILD, which is National Institute of Learning Disabilities. So as a child, you're told, like, they didn't have the balls to just, instead of like having an acronym like NILD, like, they didn't have the balls to just say you're disabled.
Yeah.
Like, you had to hide behind 4 letters. But that kind of set the trajectory for my mind as, like, I always thought I was dumb. And I only say that to say that that's why eventually I was not content with being dumber and not gooder at learning things. And that's why I realized words are the most powerful thing of influence, because what you are communicating to yourself and what you understand about the communication, even grammatically, like your self-talk is what leads to, as you said, that is the domino in the state of depression. You're like, I'm owning that I'm creating this chaos for myself because of how I communicate to myself about my reality. You know, so when I a long-winded fucking Webster's dictionary idea, but my point is just the word I thought about a lot yesterday: depression, and the idea of depression, the word meaning we were pressing into something at one point, and because of some circumstance it has been retracted and we are no longer pressed, we are depressed, and to become demagnetized towards something. So my mind just started spinning about that, and I was like, well, what in my life, what in my intimate, fortunate, unfortunate, brutal understanding of what depression is, what is that origin? What was I connected to at one point, or was I ever connected to it? And because I've never felt connected to that thing I'm supposed to be pressing into, is that why I'm sad as fuck always, and I pretend not to be?
Yeah.
So that's a little nice little warm fuzzy entry into what I wrote, but I think it's a good hypothetically it'll be a good dialogue. So it's just kind of like a stream of consciousness
Let it rip.
So it's called Pression Privation. I never felt pressed into my family. I think many people feel an intangible magnetic pull towards the family they were born into. I never felt that. There's two sides of a family magnet. One vacuums your soul towards them, and the other pushes you away and quietly disowns you. I don't talk to my family anymore because who I am is the wrong side of the magnet. I was demagnetized, and I was fucking exhausted of feeling depressed because I was not the puzzle piece that completed their family puzzle. This is depression, I think. To no longer be pressing into the family that was supposed to secure your soul in a constant state of belonging, never allowing you to fall into the quicksand that isolation is. Isolation equates to death regardless of being alive or not. My father was the judge and jury of my soul. He hated me, and he slammed the gavel of his hatred into my mind so thoroughly that it soon became the only thought that echoed. I starved myself, literally, to almost death years ago. And one night I took a bunch of sleeping pills because I wanted to go to sleep and never wake up. I woke up in the hospital and I told the doctor I wasn't suicidal. I was just wanting to sleep and not wake up. I was starving for the love, starving to press into a family, press into the idea that I mattered. It was almost too late. I was depressed out of my family and pressed into solitary confinement. Is this why we lock the worst criminals in solitary confinement? To depress them away from all human contact. Maybe we're no different than those criminals. Maybe they never felt the love of a mother or the embrace of a father. Maybe depression is simply family privation. So it's just it's dancing around the idea of just observing an intimate understanding of depression in my own life, and the root of that was not feeling connected and not feeling like I had a family that wanted me to press into them, period. And I think that's why we long for that intimacy within friendships, some form of connection finding a family outside of your blood. And I think that is kind of that root cause of what you were saying was your isolation came from recognizing the lack of magnetism with your employer, your father, and then the radical isolation you felt from my whole life was built on this trajectory towards connecting with God and being in that family. Mm-hmm. And once I realized that maybe that dad isn't there, or isn't there in the way that I thought would be this like paternal, infinite, warm blanket of love that I can just escape to, and he's this Tempur-Pedic mattress that just remembers all of me, and wants to just connect to that, and then feeling that disconnect, not the unintentional disconnect from your wife, realizing that we're supposed to be these two Christians slingshotting into spirituality together and whatever that even looks like, and disconnecting from that. So there's this like 3-pronged disconnect of isolation you had. And although we both have radically different stories, and I think a lot of people have very unique stories that have led to their depressing into some family unit, I think the root cause is kind of like what I was saying, and what I found within my own little cerebral safari is like, it's ironic that as a culture, the most brutal punishment without killing someone, without sentencing someone to death, is I'm going to put you away from any idea of a human family contact. Like, that's what you deserve because of what you have done. And it's interesting that we physically create these little holes where we put humans so that they're not pressing into family energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So from that, what are you looking at the word depression? I mean, whatever direction you want to take it. I mean, do you mirror any of those thoughts of like, when you find yourself in states of depressive feelings, do you think it's because of not feeling connected or isolated, or where do you, when you try to diagnose your depression, where does your mind tend to say, oh, this is why I'm depressed, and this is why I'm wanting to escape into addictive behaviors? Or what, like, for you personally, because obviously we'll talk about culturally and different things later to diagnose what's really going on. But for your personal journey.
No, I think you were really right on when you're talking about, like, one of the worst things we could do to another human is lock them in a room by themselves for 24 hours a day with no contact or anything else. And there's a reason for that. This, like, the physical isolation, I think is a really good metaphor for what we do in our culture all the time. And I think that my depression, or when I feel depressed, spikes is when I'm around people all the time. You're connected on the internet, you're driving around, you're walking around a ton of people downtown. There's people everywhere, but you feel disconnected. It's like we're more connected than we ever have in terms of being able to talk to people instantly and all these different things. But I also think we're the most isolated that we ever have, because it's like a synthetic form of connection and it's not the real thing. So when we have so much, it's almost like, eating sugar all day. It's like, yeah, that's what it feels like, but then you feel like crap at the end of the day. I feel like that's a really good way of kind of showing what depression's like when we're isolated like that. So
like an emotional hangover.
Basically. And I think that, for me, it's just like when I feel disconnected from other people and from myself, and, when I get away from this place of honestly being able to love who I am and accept who I am, is when I go down that road, that it starts there, and then it'll manifest in the way like, I'll want to connect with someone else because I'm not connected with myself. So I feel like that's the easiest road. It happens for me is when I just feel this disconnection that starts here, and then the next phase is like, I'm not connected to the people around my life, and then it leads to this place of, well, it's just emptiness. So, yeah, for me, it is something where it is depression. When I look at it, is a state of disconnection to you that's in here, and it's also a state of disconnection of being so focused on something that's in the future or in the past or whatever it is, because I heard someone on a TED Talk say once that like the gold dust for the person in depression is being able to live in the moment, because if you can live in the moment and learn to just be there, it helps free you. And a lot of my depression comes from like focusing on the past. I'm just, a bitterness or resentment is there, and I have to, I haven't worked it out yet, and it's just pulling me into that state. Or I'm worried about the future, or we're talking about with work. Like I'll be anxious about what's going on tomorrow and just get all worked up about it. And next thing you know, it's pulling me to that same state. So it's a hard thing when it feels like you constantly have this resistance that's pulling you towards it. And it's just like to stay into this place of joy and love is something that is really hard to do, because there's so much around you that is just wanting to pull you into that isolating place. That the idea of you're alone, no one else feels the emptiness and self-loathing you do, that shame that comes with depression, because I feel like shame is such a big part of it. Because if you take pain meds, if it's something like it almost feels like it's hard to even say, because there's such a stigma around, if you take pain meds, then you're a weak person. You couldn't beat it on yourself, right? So you had to take medication for it. And I think that's such a load of crap. But I think the reality is like just being able to free yourself from the shame that comes from not being happy all the time. And it's okay to feel that way. There's a million different reasons. And it starts with this acceptance of it so that you can let go of the shame and learn to see the situation. But yeah, for me, dude, when depression sets in, it's when all these different factors, it only takes one, and there's a million of them around you just trying to pull you away. And that's why to stay grounded is so difficult. And it's something that it's taken a lot of work for me to really be able to see, what's really going on when I get caught up in certain things. And so, I mean, how do you feel like you're in the same trade in not same trade, but the same industry I'm in, and the feelings that like for me, like there's being around the people, being around the work. Sometimes just it is you talk about magnetism. It pulls me to that direction a lot of times, and it's hard for me to be this happy and joyous person when I'm at work, because I'm just around so many people that are pulling me the other direction. So I mean, how does that affect you?
Specifically in the work environment, which is like the bulk of our days.
Well, work environment, family environment.
Yeah, just open-ended.
Yeah.
Yeah, just specifically how the inevitable feeling of being alone, I'm reminded of that about pretty much when I'm around any person. Well, I think, sounds super depressing, but that's, regretfully, it's not an understatement for me, as in my depressing adventure and of trying to just get through the days and find peace. I think for me, the biggest hurdle I had to get over was saying, I don't give a fuck about being happy. And so much of my energy and connection with other people was built on from a very young age. Well, if I believe that I'm worthless and I believe that no one really gives a fuck about me, then I have to create a false self that makes them happy. And I learned how to manipulate humor and different things to get people's attention to be perceived as someone of value. And that's what I learned. I'm like, well, if I'm fucking dumb and I don't have anything really beneficial to offer, I need to figure out how to tap into that emotional currency that I see, intent. How do I get people to like me? Well, I need to say things that people are afraid to say, and, be willing to take the heat for that. And, that's what I realized is all of my human connection or friends, quote unquote, that I had, all the relationships that I built is just a glass house waiting to crumble.
Sure.
And that ownership aspect that you talked about, like, it's my fault that I'm depressed. I think that was really the radical transformation for me, is specifically after I read Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl, super gangster. I can't suggest another. He is number one. There's not a close second in terms of books that changed my life. And he discusses the it's annoying because he talks about, like, the basically your life is your fault, and you're only a victim of your perspective of life, and you can choose to be fueled by whatever perspective you choose to have with whatever you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And as a guy who survived Auschwitz and the Nazi regime, like, that's the kind of dude I want to hear about thoughts from.
Sure.
And how to get through stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll be the first to say, like, every problem I've ever had is first world. Yeah, was there a lot of fucked up moments and a lot of dark moments in hospital and being locked up in a psych ward for, basically trying to kill myself and thinking that I didn't. Yeah, there was some dark moments, but ultimately, like, I chose to do those things. Yeah, was there an environment that facilitated, like, a reason I needed to escape? Hell yeah, but it's still first world. Like, I'm not trying to minimize what I went through, but for me, my radical transition was realizing, like, I can choose to go a different path. I can choose to, instead of, like you said, yo-yoing between not getting over what happened yesterday, what's going to happen tomorrow, how do you find that state of presence, And I realized for myself, the main reason why I'm trying to escape now, this moment, is because I have a disgusting, unfair expectation and idea of what now is supposed to be. And I for some reason subconsciously programmed, like, life is supposed to be happy and fun, and it's supposed to have all these positive adjectives associated with this moment right now. And if it's not, I can't be here. It's so uncomfortable because I'm just with myself. So I said, for lack of a better word, like, I need to say fuck happiness, and I need to figure out how to just find to be okay with myself in the quiet. Like, what does that even mean? And recognizing, like, all of my depressive, provoking tendencies were rooted in needing to use people as a mirror for what I saw in myself. And I need to use the person across from me or the people I'm around. I need to do things. I need to juggle in this circus of life, in whatever clown, whatever paint you want me to put on my face, whatever I have to do for you to see me as valuable and worthwhile. That's what I want to see. I want to create that false self to see a reflection that I'm not uncomfortable with. Mm-hmm. Because only I know when I'm alone in that emotional bathroom looking in the mirror, like, butt-ass naked, I'm like, damn. Like, not aesthetically speaking, but in my soul's bathroom.
Yeah.
I'm like, you are not beautiful. You are not a thing of value to behold. And that's what I realized, like, every problem that I've had related to depressive things is rooted in my inability to sit with myself in my soul's bathroom naked and see value and understand where is that value even curated? How do I create value within myself that I see myself fearlessly and say, it ain't perfect, but it is what it is, and I'm grateful for it,
Yeah.
And I think that's the root cause of not only mine, but everyone's depression is it's seemingly irreversible, but culturally there's that we are desperate to find value in how others perceive us. And when I started tiptoeing towards peace of mind in any hope of healing, not seeking happiness, it's because I stopped caring about what people thought of me, and I started caring about what I thought of me.
Sure. Yeah.
And I started saying, if what I am is not something I value in my soul's bathroom reflection, if what Frankl is saying in his book is correct, I can choose to start creating something that I respect and that I value, and that doesn't need to be this currency that I'm trying to fight for every day with other interactions. So I realized the root of all my depression was I didn't know who I was, because who I was always based off of what other people thought about me.
Yeah.
And I realized if the opposite of that, the antidote to that soul death, is maybe I can figure out who I am and what that means. Mm-hmm. And maybe I can create something that objectively I respect.
Sure.
And I value. So that's kind of the before and tiptoeing towards the current state now, because I think that's what's fascinating. We've talked about right before this is there's not a lot of discussion and content surrounding that journey of being crippled and seeing all of the horrific statistics of what all these depressive states are doing, like we've talked about months ago, like and one of the main things that fueled me to want to do this with you is that I read that in 2020, every 20 seconds someone's going to be committing suicide.
Sure.
And that's fucking terrifying, you know. And I want to be a part of being an antidote in whatever way I can, because I feel now, I know that I don't know in the future whether or not I'll commit suicide or not because of something. I know my current state of depression or lack thereof, it's environmental, and I'm fully aware that something could happen to my daughter, and I am not wanting to know what that's going to do to me, and whether or not it makes me want to wake up tomorrow. You know, I'm honest about that.
Yeah.
And I want to be a part of the antidote towards what do we do between being in a state of hopelessness, being in a state of isolation. How do we create a state of peace and calm amidst the inevitable chaos that's going to happen every day, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. When you think about the suicide rate, I think right now they say it's like every 40 seconds is what I heard on the news the other day. Someone's dying. And it's a horrible thought to think of how many people that are suffering like that, and looking at it as death is my only option at this point because life is so miserable. And I've heard it said from someone who's battled depression that, you know, when you're stuck in it and you're looking at it like that, you're looking at life as, I just don't want this pain to go on anymore. And there's a different way where you could ask yourself the question is like, do you really not want to live anymore, or do you just want this pain to go away? Mm-hmm. Like, there's a key point to make there where, like, if you think of life and what life is, it's the moments where you're with your daughter and it's just joyful, and it's trying new experiences, going on a roller coaster, you know, it's having these exciting moments, these loving moments, like these things that make you want to live, that show you it's just such a great, awesome thing to get to experience a life. And the hard part with what depression does is it pulls you to this place of, I just don't want this misery to go on anymore. And the mindset is just like endurance. Life is endurance. And if life is endurance, then there is some sort of resistance that you're battling. There is some sort of prison cell that you're stuck in, and you're trying to just survive it every day. And if that's what life is, who's to blame someone who doesn't want to live like that anymore? I mean, that'd be horrible. But if life is something where you get to, like, with, like, one of the greatest joys of my life is having a 6 and 3-year-old at this stage and just getting to come home and have tickle fights and, you know, play with Legos and, you know, do and stuff like that, where it's just like, it is joy. Like, it is just pure joy. You see the love that's there from these kids that's just unfiltered towards you. And it's just like, I love that so much. That's life to me at this point. And I'm thankful that that's what life is for me, but that's what it's not for so many people every 40 seconds. So I think that's the key thing. It's just like, it's like, instead of looking at somebody and almost shaming them for being stuck, try to look and be empathetic for the fact that, like, life in that state would be awful. And you and I have both had periods in that state, and it is awful. And I'm so grateful to be spared from it, to be able to see what life is, because if you could see what life is and, like, really have that clarity come to you, then that's what you could see it in the distance, and it helps get you out. But there is, like, in a lot of our talks with depression so far in this conversation is something that we're talking very much self-induced, very much something where it's a matter of changing some beliefs, matter of changing, you know, the way you're living life and yada, yada, yada. But there is a part of it too where you wonder how much it's tied to the physicality of your hardwiring and what's going on. And sometimes I feel like it is. You know, I think it was Jordan Peterson who talks about his daughter and how she had, like, I think it was like an autoimmune disease or something like that.
It was, yeah.
And how she had arthritis in so many different parts of her body, and how life was just pain and misery physically, and it helped really manifest a state of depression. And then he talks about how his daughter found a different diet where she was able to really help the arthritis go away. And a part of that arthritis going away was part of her depression going away with it. And it was fascinating because I think he was talking about how a lot of antidepressants you take are anti-inflammatory, and how there's evidence between when your body is inflamed, that depression. But it's important to note that there is a physical component to
Absolutely.
it. And I think that's the thing too. It's not just to make it. It's very much a spiritual thing, a mental state where you have to really work out those beliefs and see things differently. But there is a physical component that we don't understand yet. And I think for us as people trying to talk to people in depression and deal with our own depression is to really be empathetic and understanding towards, we don't really know what's going on here. You know, we don't know what actually makes a person depressed completely. We have a lot of different truths that we've experienced and we see clearly, but there's a lot of things that we still don't understand. And I think it's important to just rest in that idea that we don't understand it right now to help the person who's still struggling with it. Because whether or not that person thinks that there's something physically wrong to bring depression, or if it's really something spiritual, that's for them to figure out, not for anybody else. They could go sit with a psychiatrist and they could be like, hey man, here, take some Zoloft. That'll help you. And then turns out Zoloft was like the worst thing that could happen, or whatever. The point being is that I feel like the only thing we could really do, and we were talking about, like, how do you even really reach or talk to somebody in that place, is just to show them the love and compassion. That's all you can do. And to not judge them, and just to see them, and just to be somebody who they can connect with. Is something that is just, you're facilitating what they need in the only way that you can.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think you touched on something that's so important, and I think so regretfully it's been so avoided in dialogue because we fear what we don't understand, and mental illness as a factor with depression. And I think just titling it as illness makes it like a conversation phobia. And
Yeah.
I think the reality is we're all wired so uniquely. There's not another one of us amongst the billions or whatever, however many people there are. And whatever set of cerebral whatever neurons we were blessed with or lack thereof, it's important to take the stigma of like, you're this sick thing that needs to be fixed with a specific medication, and I was on the front lines of, being fathered by a man who desperately needed bipolar medication. And the funny thing, not funny is not the right word, but the interesting thing about being bipolar is the yo-yoing of your emotional state, and manic and depressive and going back and forth. And because whichever state you're in feels so real, when the high's high, you feel like you don't need your medication, and then getting off of it, it's the yo-yo. It's just, it's a roller coaster that, whatever the opposite of Disneyland is, it's that roller coaster. It's like Minnie and Mickey Mouse like committing suicide together at the end of it, and that's what it is. Just watching each other bleed out. That's the roller coaster. Sorry, kids, if you're listening. But I'm only saying this to say, like, I think the only thing we're responsible to as other humans, connecting to other humans, is not how do we fix these broken things. It's how do we facilitate the courage and the needed compassion to be a part of their healing process, because to whatever degree they have something wrong, quote unquote, or just wired in a different way, and they've gone through the right combination of horrific things, like they're in the state that they are. And yeah, maybe medication is absolutely the thing that's going to save their lives for an interim, or maybe they need to be on it forever. This coming from someone who takes intense levels of medication for ADHD. I have done a ridiculous amount of research on what is this going to do to me long term, and working with the psychologist who medicated me, blah blah blah. What's fascinating is one of my heroes, gangster Gabor Mate. He himself talks about like his struggles with understanding ADD, ADHD, in him being able to clinically see that these are things that are curated in trauma from children who don't develop in those developmental years the capacity to be connected and pay attention, and their brains get molded in a way that is broken, quote unquote, but it's because of environmental things. And it's like, well, what if Gabor and I were born into a family that loved them? Would we be different? And it's like, hell yeah, we'd be different. Would we need the medication? Probably not, but it's such an interesting thing to see such a pharmaceutically driven culture wanting to almost enable and keep us locked in this place to just numb us. And it's as if we're wanting to band-aid the soul issues that cannot be medically fixed. It's like as you said, it's a spiritual thing. Like it's a soul issue inside that absolutely you can numb it and maybe not deal with it and just keep floating by. But I think you and I are fascinated, interested in, well, how do we not necessarily cure it, but like how do we get on the roller coaster that is in Disneyland, and maybe it isn't the best roller coaster in life, but at least we're having moments of peace and moments with your kids where you can actually be present and enjoy it.
Yeah, I do know. Well, it makes me think, dude. I wrote that little blurb. After I was listening to you talk, I was like, man, I should really read that.
Please.
Just because it's something to deal with.
The one on depression?
Yeah.
It's so good.
Because, you just think about it, right? Where it is just this spiritual soul issue where so much of what we're battling is this ego of, this thing we built up that we want to be and everything else. And, and the weight of what that does to us when you're caught by this thing that's just, your measuring stick that you're never living up to or whatever. And so much of being free from that is learning to, let go in so many different ways. But anyway, I guess I'll read this thing I wrote, and you could tell me what you think. I can't remember if you've read it or not. All right, so it's called Depression. I've heard the word depressed used as a need for deep rest, where we are pressed down by the weight of our false selves and have entered into a place of spiritual exhaustion. As someone who has battled depression, there's truth in this, yet it misses the whole picture. Yes, depression seeps into the soul, where we are trapped in pain and disconnected from truth, the truth that we know to be true at our core. When we have chosen to ignore our intuition and move forward in a state of ever-needing numbness, we have already arrived in the land of the lost, which is taking more and more resonance every single day. Depression is indeed a need for rest, but it's also a confusion of truth. Just ask someone stuck in depression about what excites them, what motivates them, what influences them, and see what they say. You will find the depressed have the ability to see through what's right in front of them and see the dark truths of life. They see that most of life is suffering, speckled with moments of joy for the lucky ones. They see that there is no purpose inside our twisted experience in the matrix. They see that death is coming, unannounced and at any moment. The depressed are those swayed by the dark side, entranced by its powerful message. But the darkness fades with the presence of the light which comes with the realization that the darkness is not the whole expression of truth, just a portion, the blunt, hard-hitting natural portion. Our confusion lifts when we are shown undeserved love or joy or peace that teach us that there are greater depths to the truths keeping us in our misery. The horrors of depression exist because we become stuck, unable to press deeper into our truth. This is when we are in need of the light to step in and give us a glimpse of the other side, a glimpse that there is more to our haunting reality. Think of a time when you have been loved. Think of a time when you have experienced amazing joy. Think of a time where you have felt true peace. I hope you can, because they are moments that lift the veil of our reality. They are the shots of light in the darkness. They are a gateway to another side, which help us see that there is a deeper reality to our pain. The goal is to gravitate into the open gateway and let go of what is holding us back. Let go of our need for justice, the need for reconciliation, the need for revenge, the need to prove who you are, because nothing is worth being stuck in this place. Once we can see that, it's only a matter of time. Yeah, dude. Because to me,
Beautiful, man.
as someone stuck in a self-induced depression, it was so much just having to work out these beliefs that were so deep that were just pulling me into this place. And that's, what these, I guess when I talk about the light side like that, that's what helped pull me out of it. That helped me see the grander side to things, the whole side compared to just this dark side. So I think that so much of depression is just this battle with truth and when what we accept as truth, because so much of it is like, we learn this hard lesson from life, like you were talking about with Gabor Mate, with Gabor Mate, what I never remember say his name, where you learn early on that like if your dad was abusive, that's this hardcore lesson in life, and it's something that sits with you, and it affects how your brain shapes and how you grow or don't grow, or you're stunted. And then as you mature and get older, then you have to go back and figure out, man, what's this thing holding me back? And then to realize it's this deep-seated thing that you've had since you were 7 years old. Mm-hmm. And it's a real truth that like you saw that was real, like life's not safe or whatever it was that came from this abusive situation. Mm-hmm. And then you have to learn to see the bigger picture of that and let go of just this one side of it, just because it was so real to you. Mm-hmm. The realness of something doesn't necessarily mean that it's true completely. It just may be a facet of the truth.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a key point of like breaking free. A key point of breaking free is learning to go, man, where did this come from? Why is this my filter for life? This is a really crappy filter. Mm-hmm. How does it change?
Yeah. When I first of all, I mean, that's such a beautiful, articulate way of expressing and trying to understand depression. And the thing that stood out to me when I first read it, and when you were even saying it again from your own mouth, is it's the letting go aspect that I think is so almost impossible for people, because we don't want to own the idea that we are our own worst enemy. It's so much more. It's not easier. It's not less complicated, but there's almost a freedom, a false sense of freedom within allowing yourself to be a victim of your experiences and saying, because I am depressed or have depressive tendencies or I have trust issues with people or I approach people through this filter, like it's not my fault, it's just what I went through. Mm-hmm. And it's so important to not minimize what you went through, but recognize as a grown-ass adult who now has an understanding of what free will is and what you choose to perceive reality is will be your reality. Mm-hmm. It's saying, I did go through these things. What are they? What did they imprint upon me? And what do I need to delete from my story? Not delete in the sense of forgetting about it, but so thoroughly looking at it that it's no longer defining the present moment. Because I think that's the goal, is how to erase the chapters and go and proofread your history so that the moments you're writing in this moment now are fluid and so thoroughly filled with the ink that you want to be touching the paper of your story being written right now. And I think that's what happens is we're trying to write our life's journey. We're trying to write our own story in this moment right now, and we keep shaking the pen. We keep trying to write, and it's just shitty, man. You're like, this just isn't my life. This isn't my truth. I'm not living the life that I want to live, and I can't even read it. How's someone else supposed to read it? Like and you realize like, yeah, you got to go back and take that ink that you left back there in those moments, and you allowed that other person to write your story, because that's ultimately what it comes down to, is you're allowing someone else and what they did to you to dictate the story that's brutally being written right now in this moment. And that's it fucking sucks, man, in a way that so tugs at our pride, because we want the wrongs that were wronged towards us. We want justice to happen. We want someone to go back there and be like, fuck you, that was not okay. You're going to be sentenced to this because you hurt this person this way. And the reality is most of the wrongs that have been done to us, they're probably not going to make sense. And they're that person is probably not going to come to your front door today and be like, I brought you some chocolates and we're going to brought you a bunch of jelly bellies, and we're going to try to figure out what flavors they are, and let's just have a good kumbaya. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be forever whatever those jelly bellies, those ones that taste like farts and stuff, like that's what they're going to be to you the rest of your life. It's like, what's this? Oh, is this butter popcorn? No, that's boogers. And that's what they feel like.
Yeah.
And that's why life doesn't taste good, is because your moments will never be palatable if you don't let those jelly bellies go. And I think it's so important to, it's such a battle, because the negative things that happen and they're so real, and coming to terms with, they're never going to be made right. Maybe there's never going to be an apology. There's never going to be someone that's going to advocate you. No one can go back and change your childhood. But for me, I can only speak from my experience. Like, when my life started changing, when I started having moments of peace, is when I started recognizing that, for instance, my father, I'm like, yeah, he was a piece of shit. And he didn't know how to love me because he didn't know how to love himself. And I got the brunt of that. And in a very, this is going to sound super mature, so I promise you I'm not as mature as this is going to sound. But I genuinely, infinitely am grateful for everything that he facilitated for me, because there's not a more powerful way to learn anything about anything outside of experiencing the wrong side of it, experientially.
Yeah.
Having the warm, fuzzy side of, like, oh, this is the good thing with this lesson. This is warm and fuzzy, but it's like, well, why should I, when you're teaching a child, you're like, oh, do this because this is going to create a good path for you in life. Well, and the kid's like, well, but cocaine is dope. Why would I not want to do that? And you're like, but then you're going to miss classes and it's not going to be, but cocaine is dope, Mom. And you're like, yeah, but it's just not productive. Fuck productivity, So I'm only saying that not to make light of drugs or anything, but it's you getting to experience like the cocaine side, like the negative side of what a father is, has allowed me to see so clearly what I want to be as a father and what I want my life to look like and how I want to have relationships with people. Has it created a shit ton of trust issues with people? Hell yeah. Mm-hmm. Do I trust people? Hell no. I don't. I mean, just completely honest. Like I genuinely have very deep-seated trust issues and for good reason. People are shitty and they're selfish, but I understand that. I understand and I see them for what they are and I accept that. And I try to pursue honest relationships, but I try not to let my father dictate how I approach my relationships. And do I see people and do I have a level of wisdom with what people's intentions are most of the time? Yeah. But I refuse to let myself be depressed and not press into relationships with another dude and have honest, intimate relationships or with anyone in my life, So it's like everything my father wasn't for me has facilitated such a genuine understanding and need to continue pressing into the thing. But every day I have two choices. I can look at the filter through his lens or mine because his filter is never going anywhere. I've accepted it. I understand it. But that's the thing is depression is as depressing as you allow it to be. And that's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. Obviously, there's a medical side and a clinical side to mental illness. I'm not minimizing that. But I'm saying culturally, specifically, I think there is a massive epidemic of self-induced depression because of what environments we're exposing ourselves to every day synthetically, expecting to find intimacy with someone on a picture on a screen that you're putting words on a thing to. And you know what I mean? It's how are we supposed to like finding intimacy through looking at some naked chick get God knows what and what hole from some other dude. And she's clearly an actress, like, and she wants to act in a field that's interesting with sexuality. It's like thinking that you're going to feel true connection with a woman. Like I heard somewhere about like, obviously it was a very small case. I think I was listening to Joe Rogan. Like he was talking to someone else about like, there's a group of people teenagers that would rather watch porn than actually have a relationship and have sex with a real woman.
Yeah, sure.
And 100%, I guarantee, without being a medical person, you're welcome, humans. Like I'm never going to give any medical advice, but I guarantee you there is going to be such a real artificial intelligence sexual experience available. I guarantee you it's already ready right now. Putting on those goggle things, and I'm sure there's going to be, I mean, I don't want to know the details of what kind of things you get plugged into, but I guarantee you they've already created and will continue to create places and machines that give you as real, if not more real, intimacy with this fake robot chick that'll give you this real interaction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the inevitable death of human contact, I foresee happening in the near future. And that's why we're depressed. But we're creating an artificial one that gives us a real enough experience that's what we're going to choose, because it's the most dangerous thing in the world to try to have a relationship with anybody on any level. Because guess what? Yeah. They have you're giving them the power to say, you don't matter.
Yeah.
And that's what creates depression, is being disconnected.
Well, and it's hard with real authentic relationships, is hopefully you're opening yourself up and you're being you with that person, you're loving that person, and part of that is you are opening yourself up to a lot of pain that could come from that in real relationships, where it's hard because I feel like it's so foreign for us to even do that in our culture, because it's like what you said, underneath we all think people are selfish and have ulterior motives. I mean, that was part of why I really don't go to any more small groups anymore, is because it's a perfect example of that. You can talk about the most deep stuff in a crazy way, and then that's it. Peace out. You know, we had some good, but we were just using each other. So
it's the Catholic priest thing, like go to confession, feel like you're clean, and then bounce. But there's no relationship.
Yeah, basically, and that's the hard part. Is it's just, you know, not being able to really have that connection is something that we're really missing out on, whether it's with other people or really connected to ourselves. Being able to go sit and search the soul to see what is going on under here, because everything in our culture is trying to distract us, whether it's Netflix, video games, whatever it is. There's just so many things trying to pull you away from it. And yeah, if all you're doing is getting pulled to something that's numbing you, I mean, why are we surprised at how many people are depressed? I mean, you were saying earlier about it being about struggling with first world problems, but to me, this is a very much first world disease, because it is something, because we're so out of touch with what's going on in here, and we're clueless to, you know, the writing example you had was great, because most of us don't even realize what's written on our stories. We're just caught up in, you know, what we want or expect, or, you know, and it's just like, yeah, but you don't understand, like, you're looking through life through the filter of this painful experience that you haven't even gone back and discovered that yet. And it's just really sad. So I think that a big part of, you know, what I hope for all these people struggling with depression is clarity. Clarity on the person that's sitting in front of you when you're looking in the mirror. Clarity on who that person is, what has made this person the way, what has made you so miserable. Clarity to understand and to look at yourself with some sort of compassion, and to say, man, it's almost like that out-of-body experience. We can look at yourself and just be like, you know, what made you this way? What made you be so miserable all the time? With that inquisitive, like, gentle approach of, instead of that, like, what the fuck's wrong with you? You know, and that I've had that thing playing in my mind for so many years, and it's such a harmful approach, because it's just beating you into that cell and then locking the door shut. So I think a big part of it is just like, don't be afraid of the questions when you can sit there and look and just ask and be like, why am I this way? And don't be afraid of the answer, because so many people of us are trapped in this place. Just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not happening. So the biggest lie that comes from depression is you're the only one. You're the only one. Look at you. You're
furthering the isolation.
Yeah, and the shame cycle that it's you're messed up. Just you. Look at how awful you are. And it's like, no, we all have those feelings, you know. And it's to search it out with compassion and to figure out where, like. And I feel like one of the biggest things for me is, like, when I was depressed and struggling, it's looking at someone and asking, like, how can you actually really love yourself? Like, that seems like such a jacked up, you know, fairy tale, cotton candy approach. You know, the person that's always smiling and just happy all the time. But that's not it. it's different. And to me, there's like so much of my freedom came from learning to understand what that really means, because it culminates everything together. You could read every self-help book in the world and gain the most amount of knowledge on what you need to do to progress. But until you can love yourself enough to actually start doing those things, it's only going to be a fad. You're going to be back in depression, and you're going to be worse because you think now, oh, I read that self-help book that helped so many people now, and I'm back in depression. What's wrong with me? The cycle just gets stronger. The point being is, to me, it's that clarity and that loving understanding of like what has made me this way, and not being afraid of what the answer is, because it's being too scared to look sometimes. That's really the most tragic part. And that's the saddest part on what I think of, like when I think of the stats of like every 40 seconds. And it's those people that just haven't been shown the grace like I have enough to be able to really search that out.
Yeah. That's perfectly said, man. I think the true diagnosis of suicide is with someone's time, not to minimize, but with someone's time running up and them literally unplugging themselves from this experience in humanity. I think what's really running out is their ability to extend compassion and patience to themselves. It's no longer wanting to exist another day and pretend that how they feel is valid for reasons and experiences they experienced, and having an inability to sit with yourself long enough to go down that sad path and go retrace, to go find that ink that someone else is still writing your story today. It's the ultimate tap out, like waving the white flag and just saying, I'm tired of pretending that how I feel matters and it's valid. And I think it's such an important thing to focus on, because I know experientially that's what saved my life, was itty bitty 2 steps forward, 73 steps back days of trying to sit with myself long enough to have the courage to say, bro, you're fucked up. And then sit there long enough and to not just feel like a victim of that, but then to be like, but guess what? You have some decent reasons why. And having the patience and courage with myself over years and years and years has gotten me to a place where I can write something like that from a very like almost objective clinical like that is just an observance of trying to understand the word depression. And I know that that's my ink, that's my story. I don't let the contents of that dictate my day-to-day now. I don't. Because I feel so validated within myself for why I am the way I am. I've so thoroughly let go of needing to be something different than what I am today. I know who I am today is what I am. And if someone doesn't accept that or like that, it's not my fault. You know?
Yeah.
It's my responsibility, and I think this is the real key here, is to go from the spectrum of putting the power of my value in everyone else's hands to then saying it is never and will never be other people's responsibility or job to define my value. And I get to live today, not fully sanely, not fully holy, but I get to be the broken pieces of what I was and who I am today. I no longer tell myself I need to be perfect. I need to be the perfect father, friend, coworker. I'm so just aware of who I am, and I try to do my best. And when I don't do my best, I'm the first to say, it's okay. But we can do better in a schizophrenic way,
Yeah.
And I think that's the real important kind of culmination for people, is to see there is hope to the extent that you don't put the responsibility of your value in someone else's hands. You can, and if you want to understand whose responsibility, you can find that within yourself. You can create that within yourself. But I think the most important step forward from that is, where the hell do you draw your opinion of what matters, of what value is? And I think that's why culturally we're fucked, is because the opinions of where the cultural movement of saying to just have material wealth, to just have X amount of likes and friends and whatever, that equates to value in life. And I was listening to a David Goggins I was working out yesterday talk about how he's had so many conversations with billionaires and guys who have 30 cars of whatever, Bugatti, whatever, and Gucci gang, and he says these guys are empty, depressed, you know, and it's being able to shine a light on that and say, okay, well, how do we not buy peace of mind, but how do we intrinsically create it, and no longer be disconnected from depression? How do we press into meaning within ourselves, you know?
Yeah. No, dude, I think that's well said, and that's a great way of showing that self-love that I was talking about, exactly what you just said. Man, dude, depression is not an easy thing to talk about. And I know this is a hardcore topic to come back and try to discuss. So I hope that those who listened got something from what we were saying, because, you know, it is something that I feel like we really do need to dive into and accept the fact that it is everywhere. And until we really do that, it's just going to continually grow and grow until we become aware of it. So anything else you want to add, dude?
Well, I would just say, you know, in a culture of self-help, I think until we become aware that it's not some guru's responsibility to help yourself, it's the mystery in finding and unfolding the truth of what self-help is you're the only one that can really help yourself. And to never be a victim of assuming other people are there to fix you. It's always your responsibility to help yourself. And fortunately, we have the capacity to figure that out if we choose to.
I like that thought. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. See you later.